A tragic trend is sweeping the country. Since 1999, suicide increased 33%, leaving lives wrecked and loved ones asking why. Sharon has a look at the growing problem and possible solutions.
Steve, this is a tough subject for anyone to discuss, and we really do want to warn you this story might be sensitive to a lot of our viewers. But in 2017, more than 47,000 people took their own lives, which is nearly 2.5 times more than the amount of people who died in homicides. But survivors of suicide, lawmakers, mental health care providers, they are all working very hard to turn the tide on suicide. They all say an open discussion about this once taboo topic is key to preventing it.
No one should ever have to be a part of this club. This is a club you don't ever want to be a part of.
In 2016, Kelly Bauer's husband David took his own life.
Look at us. We had the whole world was our oyster, our whole life ahead of us.
Her love story with David began more than 30 years ago.
We met when I had just graduated from University of Missouri. We both, my family lived in St. Louis, and he had moved. He was a Kansas graduate, and so he had moved to St. Louis, and we met at church. We just fell in love, and 9 months after we met, we got married. I walked across the grad school platform, receiving my master's degree, fully pregnant with our first child.
Eventually, Kelly and David's family grew to 3 children, and they settled in Charlottesville. He worked as an interior architect, and she opened her own practice as a mental health care counselor. A happy life, but not without bumps in the road.
David struggled over the years with depression and anxiety off and on.
By 2016, with their youngest finishing high school, Kelly and David hit what she calls a sweet spot in life.
And we were about in that place where, all of our children were going to be gone. We could just really kind of invest in each other again and look towards retirement, and we had a grandbaby on the way.
But none of that was meant to be. Kelly came home one evening to a violent situation.
And I ended up having to leave our home that night because he was having such a difficult time and was so very angry, and went to stay with a friend.
Late in the evening, she received a terrifying text.
He told me that that I could find his body by our wood pile out in our driveway, and that I was to contact the Albemarle County Police.
Sadly, David Bauer left his family no note, no reason for his death. But it is reason for Kelly to tell her story, both as a survivor and as a mental health care counselor for so many years.
Some people are very good at hiding. Some people are fine for a while, and then something happens. In this case, something happened. Something triggered off him on that day, at that time. And I actually did not have a clue.
Stigma is a real problem.
Dr. David Moody is a psychiatrist with Region 10 Community Services Board in Charlottesville.
Suicide is usually an act of desperation. And it's not necessarily that people want to die, but they want to stop the pain. People don't say anything, they don't talk about it. Well, how did Uncle Billy die? Well, we just won't talk about that. And that's the problem. That's what keeps people from getting help. That's what keeps people from asking for the help that they need.
And I think the first step is to just say, we do have to openly talk about this, folks. It's very painful. It's very ugly.
When I was young, people would whisper the word cancer. And to see the evolution, we now have 5K runs that celebrate survivors of cancer. That's wonderful. We're not there with mental illnesses. There's still the stigma about that.
The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is trying to erase the stigma. The group started the Out of the Darkness Walk in 2002 to lift up survivors. Now it's held in several cities across the nation every fall, and it's the foundation's largest fundraiser.
I have a little grandson that doesn't know his grandfather, never will. Another little grandbaby on the way. He missed out. He missed out on those blessings. My hope is that somebody watching who's contemplating it will reconsider.
For every person who takes their own life, the Centers for Disease Control estimates another 25 try. That is nearly 1.2 million attempts. To reverse that deadly trend, though, the move is on for survivors to share their stories, to shed light on these dark decisions, and ultimately save lives.
This one here is the famed purple and teal ribbon. It represents suicide awareness and prevention.
34-year-old Adrian Stacy looks forward to a future he almost lost.
To live through it is an eye-opener. It has. It definitely set me on a completely different path than what I thought I was going to have 18 years ago.
At 16, Adrian felt his world caving in. His parents divorced and his father lived miles away battling cancer. Adrian stayed in Lyndhurst, Virginia, with his mother, a baby sister, and stepfather.
And one day I came home from school and my mom was gone. And I was like, where's my mother? And they said that she had to be hospitalized. She suffered a mental breakdown. Her stepfather was a truck driver and he was never home. You know, he was always on the road.
With no adult in the home, Adrian tried to grow up.
That left me to take care of my little baby sister by myself. I was her brother, her mom, her dad, until CPS showed up and took her away from me. Because I was under the age of 18 and now I had nothing left. My father was sick and living down in Franklin and I was all the way up here. And I had no one.
Overwhelmed with sadness, one evening the 16-year-old made a dangerous decision to clean 2 guns his mother kept in the home.
And I hit that point. And I put a round in the cylinder and I slammed it shut and I turned the stereo up to where nobody could hear anything.
But somebody was listening. Instead of drowning out his fatal intent, the music caught the attention of a friend out walking his dog.
I sat on my floor and I pulled the hammer back and it wasn't a millisecond before the hammer dropped that I felt the hand snatch it out of my hand. And just as it went off, he walked in seconds before the gun went off. And it was just... I'm sorry. But he saved my life that day.
A short time later, Adrian reunited with his father before he died.
He was my best friend, you know. That man knew everything except for that. Because I knew back then, even just back in the early 2000s, that was still a very taboo subject to touch on.
Rebecca Texter is a suicide prevention coordinator for the state and studies stories like Adrian's.
It is true that the majority of people that have been interviewed after a suicide attempt have said they were glad that that they did not die by suicide.
I didn't exactly have the best hand dealt to me with mental health, and but I since then have bounced back, you know, and I have wonderful friends. I have an amazing woman, and it's just, life is really, really good now.
His fiancée Logan lost her uncle Guy Shiflett to suicide, and both now work with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
When she found the foundation, she realized that there was a whole community of people, not just survivors like me and her, but veterans, you know, parents, teachers, just an entire community of people who are all going through the same thing. I know there has been an increase over the past few years involving overdoses or suicide with firearms. One of those being Becky, who jump-started this whole thing for me.
This thing is a YouTube public service announcement for suicide prevention he made when he worked for a pawn shop that sells firearms. Lock and Talk is state-sponsored.
What we do know from the research on lethal means safety is that it has saved people's lives. That feeling can diffuse if there is a little bit of time and space between them and that means.
But Lock and Talk is only one tool in the intervention kit. In her role, Texter reaches across generations, teaching adults how to mentor young people and communicate with those who are struggling.
What I do is on the very front end of that. Prevention science is about building individuals' resiliency, so that there won't be a mental health crisis. How to look for signs that someone is maybe on a downhill slope, that they're starting to feel more desperate or more emotional pain, and feel more comfortable as a helper asking the question, are you thinking of suicide? I want to hear from your perspective. It is, I've seen it open doors for people. They suddenly go, I have that human connection again.
Rebecca's passion for intervention is born from something very personal.
For me, it's because I survived a suicide attempt over 20 years ago now.
But like Adrian, she only recently went public.
I was embarrassed, very embarrassed. Gosh, if people knew that about me, what would they think? Would they trust what I'm saying? When in reality, I started to realize that if I don't come out and say it, I don't know, just didn't feel honest.
Her unique role as a suicide prevention specialist and survivor landed her story in a recent issue of People magazine.
Yeah, I might as well just come out and say, hey guys, you know what? It did happen to me. But I truly think that an intervention, you know, a true suicide intervention would have worked for me. And that's why I teach this.
What Adrian once wanted to hide, now he displays daily.
And I got that because of all of this going on with my story, and I wanted something that I could look at and be like, I lived through that.
In Virginia, suicide is the second leading cause of death for 15 to 34-year-olds. Sharon's here with a look at one mother's story and her fight to help young people in crisis.
Steve, no parent should ever have to bury their own child, but more and more are facing this sad reality. One Crozet mother who lost her 19-year-old son is now turning her tragedy to outreach to save other young people. We want to warn you, though, this story contains sensitive subject matter which may upset some of our viewers.
That's his signature off of his ID, and then that's his heartbeat.
Ginger Germani lost her son Austin in April 2017, only days before the end of his first year at Christopher Newport University, a school he always dreamed of attending.
I was like, I know how much you need this. You did it. You're here.
For Austin, the accomplishment ranked high. He struggled to make it there. His difficulties started young with a phone call from the nurse at middle school.
Austin's had way too many stomach aches. Like, this is not, like, and I know there's actually nothing wrong with his stomach. And she goes, have you talked about this at all?
Therapist diagnosed him with anxiety, then ADD, and ultimately depression. He took medicine. He went to therapy. Austin grew into a good-looking teenager, hanging out with his brother, his friends, acting silly, competing in robotics, looking forward to the rest of his life, and hiding the demons tormenting him.
He came home one day in the fall, his senior year of high school. He came home, came in the door, slammed the door, kicked something across the room, went upstairs, threw his chair across the room. He was like, Mom, I'm not good. I can't take it. I can't do this.
What Austin said next frightened her.
He said, Mom, I feel terrible. He said, I've tried to take my life before, and I feel like I want to do it again.
Ginger rushed him to his therapist, then to Virginia Treatment Center for Children for a 10-day stay. Afterward, she bargained with her son.
And, can we have an agreement that the first step, the minute that, when you feel that way, can you talk to me first?
Austin graduated high school and jumped hurdles to make it to CNU.
He made it. He got waitlisted. It was a long ride. He got in there, and you would think that I'd be like scared leaving him there. I was so happy for him.
But at the end of his second semester crisis, with only final exams to go, he contacted his mom.
He was like, Mom, you're not good. And I was like, you know what, buddy? You are home in 5 days. Knock these exams out, and I do not care how you finish. I do not care. Finish them, because that's not what matters. Is let's get through that week and get you home, and let's just work on you. And I did not know to ask in that moment, are you thinking about killing yourself? The last thing I heard from him was, I love you.
That evening, the school called Ginger to come to the hospital in Newport News. Austin hanged himself.
He was alive. Essentially, his brain was without oxygen long enough to shut down pretty much everything but his breathing.
After 5 days, when he should be home for summer break, Austin's breathing slowed and doctors removed the ventilator.
At this point, we take it off and we see if he can live without it, and if not, we call it. But then we got to hook him back up because we need to save the organs and that, I mean, that's the cold reality of it. It's good to have them to still share the stories. Ginger, thanks for being the second mom. Thanks for allowing us to be us.
Afterward, Austin's friends wrote letters to Ginger.
If there's any gift you can give someone in that situation, that's
At Walmart,
as good as it gets.
you get so much from
It's
it.
people that can talk to you about your kid. That's one of my absolute favorites. That one bright blue eye. And you know what's interesting is that when I donated his organs, I couldn't donate his eyes.
After Austin's death, Ginger studied how colleges and universities care for students with mental health issues.
The more and more we learned, college counseling centers they don't have the capacity, and they cannot hire enough to serve the entire student community's mental health needs.
She joined with Crozet businessman Aaron Syme, owner of telehealth company WebRTC Venture, to form UniWellness.
What she went through really inspired us to try and do something in that demographic in particular and bring access, better access and more access to college students for mental health care. So we're piloting the software with Washington and Lee University right now in Lexington to help their student health center provide mental health counseling to students remotely when they can't make it into the student health center.
And so I actually struggled with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Paige Long recently graduated CNU with a psychology degree. She served as president for the campus chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. She didn't know Austin, but when she heard of his death, she sent Ginger a letter.
I don't know her. I don't know what her attitude is about mental health, but at least I did it. And if there's a chance that I can help and that she can feel supported in some way, I'd like to do that. So I sent her that letter.
The outreach sparked a fast friendship, and Ginger helped Paige land a job at WebRTC working on the UniWellness project.
It takes more people to go into the field. It takes more people to talk about it openly, and it takes more people to want to take an interest in how do I help this be better.
Steve, Senator Deeds has firsthand knowledge of dealing with mental illness. 6 years ago, his son, Austin Gus Deeds, attacked him and then took his own life. The senator has since turned this immense heartbreak of that day into a platform for change.
Gus was just remarkable. I remember, he was a left-handed guy, and left-handed banjo players are pretty rare.
State Senator Creigh Deeds calls Hot Springs, Virginia home, idyllic Bath County, where he reared his son Gus and 3 daughters.
I've got great memories of my children, all 4 of them, on their knees at ponds looking for salamanders and other critters in the water. My children grew up outside, and country kids.
Memories now marred by an awful day when his own son would turn violently against him and then take his own life. The story is a difficult one because Gus showed so much talent and promise on his way to adulthood.
He was started on the varsity soccer team in Bath County High School in 9th grade. He was a trombone player. He taught himself to play harmonica, taught himself to play piano.
In the fall of 2009, Gus took a break from the College of William and Mary and joined his dad as he campaigned to be Virginia's next governor.
Gus, after the campaign didn't work out, Gus decided to take another semester off.
The first signs of trouble began creeping in.
He stayed in Bath County with his mother. His mother and I were separated by that time.
Eventually, they divorced, but kept the communication open when it came to Gus.
His mother texted me one morning and she said, Gus is gone. I just got up and found a note that Gus had gone for a ride. And a few days later, she got email from Gus, or a text or something, of a Welcome to Wyoming road sign.
The odd tangent worried his parents, and by the fall of 2010, they reached out for counseling.
He was diagnosed at that time with a bipolar disorder. So it was after, he was 20, 21 years old before there were ever really any signs that there was a problem.
In 2011, his son's mental illness became painfully apparent.
And one time, we were sitting at the table, in the kitchen table, and he said, Dad, I feel like I'm going to kill myself.
Senator Deeds took his son to the hospital.
He looked at me and said, Dad, this is where I belong. I just have to get my medicine straight. And, I felt so positive about that. It hurt like anything to know your brilliant son, who the Dean's List student from William & Mary, the valedictorian of his high school class, the kid that could play any instrument he wanted to, the kid who wrote songs, who was a composer, was having this mental health issue.
Months later, another hospital stay. The family worked to keep their adult son on the straight and narrow.
And when I'd ask him about medication or seeing a doctor, he'd bluntly tell me, Dad, that's none of your business.
Gus returned to William & Mary in the fall of 2013, but before the end of the semester, he came home.
That weekend, I took Gus out to eat a couple times. He argued with me about things. He was clearly just delusional, but he was still my son. My precious son.
Deeds knew Gus needed immediate help, a third hospital stay. But this time, the state couldn't find a bed, and the young man, so eager to help his father on the campaign trail, turned cold.
Wouldn't communicate with me at all.
Deeds planned to try again the next day and traded a chilling text with Gus's mother.
She said, get out of the house. And I just texted her back. I said, I'm not going to leave my son. But I did latch the door in my bedroom, and first time I've ever done that. And he was trying to get in that night. It was tough.
After a restless night, on the morning of November 19th, 2013, Deeds headed to the barn to feed his horses.
I had a feed bucket in my hand. Gus was coming across the yard. He was just marching basically across the yard. And I said, hey, bud, sleep all right? And he said, yeah. Or he said morning, something like that. And then I turned my back and
Even as Gus stabbed his father repeatedly, Deeds couldn't help thinking of his son's welfare.
And I worried at that time that Gus was going to wind up in jail. But I needed to get away. I got through the barn. I called 911. And I kept working my way toward this road.
Law enforcement swooped in, and eventually a medical transport rescued him.
I was in the helicopter, and they talked about, I heard on the radio talking about a second victim. Yeah. So they kept me awake. I got to Charlottesville, and I was, I'll never forget the army of people that met me there.
Gus Deeds ended his own life, and Deeds would survive several stab wounds. Once back at work, the senator found support.
In 2014, with my face scarred and crying nearly all the time, there were a lot of people that saw me and wanted help, and a lot of those people knew Gus.
Nobody has had experience with this issue like I have.
Because of the situation I've had with my son, I have an opportunity and a responsibility to step up for people that are in trouble.
Deeds went to work for change.
We passed better last resort legislation, so if someone is found to be a danger to themselves or others, they're going to be hospitalized. So a situation like that will not exist again.
The General Assembly passed a law to lengthen the evaluation time for a person in crisis from 4 to 8 hours and the hospital hold time from 48 to 72 hours. In Gus's case, another 4 hours might have revealed the state did have a bed for his son that night in 2013.
Would Gus still be alive today? Who knows? But he would have been alive that if he'd been hospitalized that afternoon, he would have been alive that afternoon. He would have been alive that night. He would have been alive the next day.
To do what his dad says he did best.
Whatever situation Gus was in, he always disappeared into the music. That was a relaxing point for him, and he was such a skilled musician.
People on the front lines agree. The first step to reducing suicide is breaking the silence. Out of the Darkness walks began in this country in 2002 to erase a stigma that persists in 2019. People coming together with a simple message.
It affects every family. And it's something we have to address head on.
Virginia State Senator Creigh Deeds lost his son Gus to suicide in 2013 and says society needs a change of attitude.
Mental illnesses are so complex. You would like for there to be an even playing field. People with cancer, people with heart disease, people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, they're all they're all entitled to some equal dignity.
It is seen as shameful and not to be discussed.
Kelly Bauer worked as a mental health counselor for more than 30 years and lost her husband David to suicide.
But if we don't start talking about it, if those of us who've survived don't start talking about it and reaching out and sharing and taking hold of each other and lifting each other up and explaining as best we can what it's like, we're going to continue to deal with it.
At Region 10 Community Services Board, doctors and counselors say we need to recognize mental illness or emotional crisis can be fatal, just like heart disease or cancer.
Suicide is usually an act of desperation.
Dr. David Moody says the pain can be overwhelming.
If you have a disease of the brain that makes you depressed and hopeless, and you can't see options or choices for yourself, then people are left to the worst option, which is suicide.
Region 10 Emergency Services, this is Mary.
Mary Feemster is a counselor and sometimes poses a hard question she says you do not need training to ask.
There is never any harm in asking the question, are you feeling suicidal? Are you thinking about killing yourself? So if you're worried about somebody, it is perfectly okay to ask. You'll never put the idea in somebody's mind.
And I think it's really important to ask that question directly.
Kurt Gleason is Director of Emergency Management and says some behaviors are telling.
And if someone that you care about is feeling like they're a burden to you or a burden to others, it'd be important to ask them if they're feeling about it, if they're considering ending their life.
Just like we have diseases of other organs in the body or injuries to other parts of the body, it's a disease of the brain. And so that affects how people think, how they perceive things around them, and we need to help people with that.
But resources are stretched thin. Western State Hospital in Stanton is often at 90+% capacity. Deeds says Virginia needs to fix that.
We have to figure out ways to incent the best students in medical schools to go into mental health services, to go into psychiatry. We have to figure out ways to build our workforce across the board.
Rebecca Texter works as a suicide prevention specialist with the state. She focuses on education.
What I do is on the very front end of that. Prevention science is about building individuals' resiliency so that there won't be a mental health crisis.
But if there is, her advice, be blunt, ask the question.
How to look for signs that someone is maybe on a downhill slope, that they're starting to feel more desperate or more emotional pain and feel more comfortable as a helper asking the question, are you thinking of suicide?
Speaking out, talking about it, bringing it from that place of taboo and, oh, we don't want to talk about it, to more of, hey, This is just a part of the breakdown of the body, like every other part of the body. It's very treatable. Here's what we do.
We've got to do the best we can to defeat the stigma. There's a stigma around mental health that prevents people from getting the help they need.
It needs to not be a secret. It needs to not be hidden, to come out from the background and be embraced as yet another something that anyone can have to deal with.
No stigma needed here, just an understanding. If we're going to save lives, we all have to come out of the darkness.